Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. The POS went down. The wrong workaround could break dinner service. The POS went down. That was the first problem. The second problem started when 7 capable people created 7 different ways to keep dinner moving. The POS died and the restaurant responded by forming 7 tiny governments, each printing its own currency. One server wrote an order by hand, another tried a fixed terminal. The bartender started a paper tab. Somebody called a modifier directly to the line, takeout left online ordering open. Everybody was trying to help and food was still leaving the window, so the restaurant looked active. But it had not adapted, it had fractured. That distinction matters because movement is not automatically control, right? Food leaving the window does not prove the order path is reliable. A payment screen moving forward does not prove the transaction completed. A handwritten ticket reaching the kitchen does not prove another version is not sitting inside a delayed electronic queue. The restaurant can look busy, responsive, even decisive, while losing the ability to answer basic operating questions with confidence. Did the kitchen receive the order? Was the modifier attached? Did the payment complete? Is the check still open? Is the paper ticket replacing the digital order or duplicating it? Once the team cannot answer those questions from one reliable operating picture, this is no longer only a technology problem. It is an order control problem. It is a kitchen sequence problem. It is a payment control problem. It is a guest trust problem. And if it runs long enough, it becomes a recovery problem that follows the team through closing and into the next day. That is where tactical resolution fits. Tactical resolution is for an active problem that is already interfering with the objective. You cannot postpone it. The team still has to move, but the permanent repair is not available inside the current operating window. The leader needs a temporary stabilization move that reduces the interference without allowing the response to damage the rest of the system. And let me make that more precise. The objective is not to make the restaurant operate exactly as it did before the outage. That may not be possible. The objective is to preserve one coherent operating path until normal capability returns, and the temporary work can be reconciled. That is the difference between a workaround and control. If the manager tries to preserve every normal function, every revenue channel, every payment method, and every service promise, the response gets too broad. The restaurant starts rebuilding the POS out of paper, memory, verbal calls, individual judgment, and hope. That is not a backup system. That is a kitchen seance with Sharpies. I do not care how good the intent was. That is uncontrolled process expansion. Renee is the general manager of a full-service restaurant that seats about 160 guests. The operation has a busy bar, a separate takeout station, handheld ordering devices, fixed POS terminals, a kitchen display system, and several digital ordering channels. On a normal Friday night, all of those pieces are connected. The server enters the order. The system records the table, seat, item, modifier, timing, and price. The kitchen receives the ticket. The line prepares the food. Expo protects the sequence. The server delivers the order. The guest pays. The check closes. The shift record reflects what happened. Friday dinner service begins cleanly. By 6:45, most of the dining room is occupied. The bar is full. The host stand is quoting a 40-minute wait. The kitchen line is carrying a heavy but manageable board. Expo is balancing dine-in, takeout, and delivery work. Servers are carrying open checks across multiple tables. At 7:15, the restaurant's primary internet connection fails. The first sign is small. One handheld shows a connection warning. A server walks to a fixed terminal and tries the order again. Another server says a payment screen is spinning. The bartender reports that a check will not close. Then Expo notices that a ticket expected from table 32 never appeared on the kitchen display. Renee does not know whether the cause is the internet provider, the POS platform, a local network device, the payment processor, one terminal, or a wider service interruption. She does not have enough information to repair the technical problem, and she cannot stop dinner service while she waits for a perfect diagnosis. but she does know what the failure is doing to the operation. Orders are entering inconsistently. The kitchen cannot trust that every ticket arrived. Servers cannot confirm whether some card transactions completed. Open checks are accumulating. Online order visibility is weakening. The host stand is still feeding guests into the dining room based on the restaurant's normal capability, even though the normal control system is no longer reliable. The issue is active. Waiting is no longer an acceptable operating response. The assistant manager says, "Let everybody write orders by hand until it comes back." A server says, "My handheld still lets me take offline payments." The bartender says, "I can keep my own paper tabs." The takeout lead asks, "Should I leave online ordering open in case orders are still coming through?" Each suggestion has logic behind it. The assistant manager wants to keep food moving. The server wants guests to pay. The bartender wants to preserve open tabs. The takeout lead wants to protect revenue. I respect the instinct. These people are not standing around waiting to be rescued. They are trying to protect the part of the operation directly in front of them. But here's the problem. If Renee approves every local solution, the restaurant may continue moving, but it is no longer moving through one system. It is now a federation of angry little countries, and Expo is the United Nations with a heat lamp. It is moving through several temporary systems that do not share the same records, rules, limits, or cleanup requirements. The dining room uses handwritten tickets. The bar keeps a separate tab sheet. One handheld processes approved offline transactions. Another device gets restarted. Servers call orders verbally because they do not trust the paper path. Expo receives a handwritten ticket that may duplicate a delayed electronic ticket. Online ordering remains open without reliable visibility. Now we are getting somewhere because that is the actual leadership trap. Keeping everything moving feels like protecting service. It may actually destroy operating coherence. This is where responsibility has to be placed correctly. If the restaurant never established an approved outage path, never trained the team, never clarified authorized processes, and never assigned the kitchen handoff, leadership does not get to punish servers later for improvising. You cannot withhold the standard, preparation, authority, and support, then blame people for inconsistency. Leadership owns the contingency standard. The team owns following it once it is clear, supported, and practiced. Does that make sense? Accountability still matters. But accountability without a usable standard is not discipline. It is just punishment after confusion. Renee's objective cannot be make every channel work exactly as it did before. The system that made that possible is unavailable. Trying to imitate every normal capability through improvised processes can create more interference than the outage itself. So she narrows the objective. Protect order integrity, protect kitchen sequence, protect the approved payment path, protect guest communication, preserve enough information to reconcile the shift later. The first question is not, how do we keep everything open? The better question is, what is the smallest temporary operating path that allows dinner service to continue without creating unacceptable order, payment, kitchen, guest, or recovery risk? That is the tactical resolution question. The response has to be strong enough to reduce the interference and narrow enough that the temporary fix does not become the next failure. Renee cannot invent the technical outage procedure during the rush. Offline behavior depends on the provider, configuration, payment processor, device, connectivity, and company policy. Some approved systems can store transactions until reconnection. Some functions may not work. Some troubleshooting actions can destroy pending information. So the point is not which button Renee should press. The restaurant has to follow its approved provider, payment, security, and outage procedures. Her leadership job is to control how the operation moves while that technical process is being worked, right? She establishes one temporary order path. The kitchen already has knives, fire, and people one ticket away from becoming folklore. It does not need a choose-your-own-adventure ordering system, not whatever paper happens to be nearby, not a separate format for every server, not verbal tickets entering the kitchen from 5 directions. One recognized process the front of house, expo, kitchen, bar, and takeout team can all understand. She assigns one person to control order movement between the dining room and expo. That person is not also serving tables, troubleshooting the router, handling guest complaints, and closing checks. Their job is to preserve the temporary order path and prevent the kitchen from receiving multiple versions of the same order. She limits offline payment activity to the restaurant's approved process, designated devices, and authorized employees. She does not assume that because one handheld appears capable of taking a payment, every server should begin processing offline transactions. Offline does not mean risk-free. It just means the bad news has agreed to arrive after the guest leaves. A transaction may remain pending until reconnection. Depending on the provider and configuration, some transactions may later complete, some may decline, and some may be placed at risk by the wrong device action before upload. Then she addresses digital demand. A full dining room is not the only operation feeding the kitchen. Takeout, delivery, and digital orders can create a second dining room the guests inside cannot see. It has no chairs, no faces, and somehow still manages to yell louder than the one standing in front of you. If Renee cannot see or sequence those orders, leaving every channel open introduces invisible volume. When the system reconnects, delayed orders may appear inside a kitchen that is already behind. Now the team has cancellations, refunds, driver congestion, guest complaints, and a larger recovery burden. Look, I understand the pressure. Nobody wants to shut off revenue on a Friday night. Nobody wants to explain to ownership that a channel was paused. But accepting an order the restaurant cannot see, sequence, prepare, or fulfill is not protecting revenue. It is transferring the consequence to the guest, the driver, the kitchen, the manager, and whoever has to process the refund later. That kind of decision irritates me because the cost did not disappear. It was pushed on to somebody else. Renee also changes the host stand's capacity instruction because the restaurant no longer has normal order entry speed, kitchen visibility, or payment flow. The host does not need a technical lecture. The host needs clear direction on wait times, seating pace, and what guests should be told. Servers need one temporary order rule, one payment rule, one exception path, and one review point. The kitchen needs one recognizable temporary ticket. The bar needs the same check control logic as the dining room. Takeout needs to know which orders are confirmed, which are uncertain, and what can still be promised. That is what right looks like to me. Not everybody improvising harder. One shared path, one set of boundaries, one owner for the handoff, one owner for reconciliation, one point where the leader checks whether the temporary process still works. The failure path becomes clearer when you look at what the POS normally provides. It is not just an order entry screen. It is the shared operating record connecting the guest, server, table, kitchen, check, payment, timing, and closeout. When that shared record disappears, people begin operating from partial truths. The server believes the order was sent. The kitchen believes it was not received. The guest believes the card was charged. The payment remains pending. The takeout team believes no order arrived. The order appears after reconnection. The host believes the kitchen can absorb another table. Expo is already carrying duplicated work that is not visible on the board. No, let me sharpen that. The restaurant does not fail because people have incomplete information. Incomplete information is part of the condition. The restaurant fails when leadership allows those incomplete views to become separate operating systems without creating one controlled way to align them. The internet outage is the technical event. The operating failure forms when the restaurant no longer has one reliable way to determine what was ordered, what reached the kitchen, what was modified, what was paid, what remains open, and what has to be cleaned up later. Think about one table. One server writes the full order on paper. Another employee later enters only the entree because the drinks were already in the system. A third person enters the same order again because the first attempt appeared to fail. One version reaches the kitchen electronically after a delay. Another arrives by hand. The modifier is called verbally. Expo now sees three signals and has to decide whether they represent one order, two orders, or a remake. That is not ticket control. That is culinary paternity court. First comes order confusion. The kitchen receives inconsistent table numbers, missing seat positions, unclear timing, and modifiers separated from the main order. Expo loses confidence in the board because the board no longer represents the operation. Then production becomes unstable. The line reacts to whichever ticket is newest, loudest, or physically closest. A cook prepares an entree without knowing whether another version is already working. A remake begins before anyone confirms the first order was lost. Ticket times increase, but the team cannot tell whether the delay comes from volume, duplication, or missing information. Then the instability reaches the guest. One table waits because its ticket never arrived. Another receives duplicate entrees. A third receives an item without the requested modifier. A takeout customer arrives for an order the restaurant cannot locate. At the same time, approved offline payments may remain pending until reconnection, and some may later complete or decline. Then labor waste expands. Servers search for tickets. Managers compare paper notes to open checks. The kitchen remakes food. The bar reconstructs tabs. Takeout employees answer calls. The outage may last 30 minutes. The cleanup can last through closing and into the next business day. That consequence chain matters because a temporary solution is not complete if the team cannot reconcile what happened. A lot of leaders treat reconciliation like administrative cleanup. It is not. It is part of the response. When the POS reconnects, queued orders may appear. Pending payments may complete or decline. Delayed tickets may print. Open checks may show a status that does not match the paper notes. Some orders may already have been remade, comped, or manually handled through an approved alternate process. Which table received the duplicate entree? Which check was paid offline? Which guest was told the payment failed? Which online order was prepared manually? Which order appeared after the customer had already been refunded? Which tip belongs to which check? Which void was legitimate? If nobody owns those questions, the restaurant has not recovered. The machine came back from the dead, looked at the paperwork, and denied knowing any of these people. I mean, the screen is back. The operation is not. So Renee assigns cleanup before dinner continues through the temporary path. Someone tracks open checks, manual tickets, approved offline transactions, unresolved payments, digital order uncertainty, guest exceptions, discounts, voids, and anything that must later be matched against the restored system. She also keeps herself out of the wrong work. The general manager cannot become a $200 an hour router wearing non-slip shoes. The general manager cannot spend the entire rush restarting devices, checking cables, calling support, and moving between terminals while the restaurant fractures around her. If Renee is the only person with enough authority and operating awareness to align the host stand, servers, bar, expo, kitchen, and takeout station, then that is where she belongs. A capable technician or designated manager can work the approved support path. Renee needs status from that path. She does not need to disappear into it. How about this? One person tracks the technical condition. One person controls the restaurant's temporary operation. They exchange the information required to determine whether the containment still holds. Renee also establishes a reassessment point because a temporary workaround cannot run until somebody feels like the outage is over. It needs a defined operating check. Is the kitchen receiving one recognizable order path? Are duplicate orders appearing? Are payments becoming less visible? Is the host stand feeding more volume than the reduced system can absorb? Are digital orders entering unexpectedly? Has the provider confirmed any change? Is the temporary process reducing interference, or has it started creating another kind of interference? And here's another distinction. The containment move is not sacred. It is temporary by design. If it stops protecting the objective, the leader changes it. The restaurant may need to narrow the menu, reduce seating, pause another channel, revise the temporary ticket control, or stop an approved offline function if it creates unacceptable uncertainty. Those choices depend on the restaurant's actual policy, provider, system capability, and current condition. The standard stays the same. Use the minimum effective action. Inspect what it can damage. Reassess before the temporary fix becomes the next failure. I have learned to respect temporary solutions because they can be more dangerous than they look. Once the work starts moving again, people stop evaluating them. The kitchen is producing, guests are receiving checks, the team feels relief. And relief can create false confidence. The work is moving, so everybody assumes control has returned. Restaurants are very good at confusing "nobody is screaming right now" with "the problem is solved." It may not have. The temporary process may only be hiding the damage. The kitchen may still be carrying duplicates. Payments may still be unresolved. Digital volume may still be invisible. The closeout burden may be growing with every transaction. That is why leaders have to keep inspecting the workaround after the immediate panic passes. The most dangerous temporary process is often the one that looks successful enough that nobody wants to question it. Now let's connect this back to the direct action system. CSA improves the read before containment. Renee needs to know what failed, what still works, what changed, what cannot be trusted, and where the outage is interfering. The dark screen is not the full situation. Order flow, kitchen communication, payment status, digital visibility, host capacity, guest communication, and staff workload all matter. Deepen helps select the response once the situation is clear enough. Tactical resolution fits because the interference is active, postponement is no longer appropriate, and a controlled temporary action remains available. Pro sharpens the risk picture across guest trust, payment control, food quality, team load, and closeout accuracy. TMC protects direction and ownership, so the team does not receive 5 different rules. FLS turns the containment decision into controlled action. ALC captures what failed, what held, and what needs to change before the next outage. That is enough system connection for this episode. The point is tactical resolution. It needs a clean read before action, risk control during action, clear communication, disciplined execution, and learning after the disruption. Maybe you lead a quick service restaurant where the drive-through system loses connectivity during lunch. Maybe you manage a hotel where the property management system becomes unavailable during a sold-out arrival window. Maybe you oversee a retail operation where checkout, returns, loyalty, and inventory visibility fail during peak traffic. The systems differ, the pattern does not. The primary system fails. Local workarounds appear. Capable people protect the station directly in front of them. The operation begins creating separate versions of the truth. The leader has to decide whether the response is restoring control or merely restoring motion. So take a look at your own environment. What is being interrupted? What still works? What cannot be trusted? How many temporary paths has the team created? What could the workaround damage? Who owns cleanup? What tells you the temporary process is failing? Those are recognition questions. They are not the full tactical resolution process. Before the next Friday rush, the restaurant should be able to answer one basic question. If the POS goes down tonight, what is the one approved temporary route everybody follows? Who controls order movement between the front of house and kitchen? Which payment continuity options are approved? What digital channels may need to pause? Who owns the exception record and reconciliation? When will the temporary process be reassessed? If those answers do not exist, leadership has work to do before the next outage. Do not hand 12 people blank paper during a crisis and conduct a witch trial at closing because the handwriting did not match. Do not make the team invent the standard during the worst operating window and then blame them for inconsistency. Build the capability, clarify the requirement, train the path, then hold people accountable for following it. The POS outage was one problem. The restaurant still had a choice about the second. It could let every server, bartender, host, cook, manager, and takeout employee create a separate workaround. Or it could establish one controlled temporary path that protected order integrity, kitchen sequence, payment visibility, guest communication, and recovery. Tactical resolution is not waiting for the perfect fix. It is not attacking the failure with every workaround the team can invent. It is controlled stabilization. The action has to be strong enough to reduce the interference. narrow enough to protect the wider operation, clear enough for the team to follow, documented enough to reconcile, and temporary enough to remove. The outage does not have to become a second outage created by the response. When you are ready to go deeper with this tool, go to www.direct-action-system.io/course-directory. Open the course directory, find the course tied to tactical resolution and deepen, and start there. That is where the deeper application belongs. Thanks for listening to the briefing.